Imagine a man so wealthy that when he traveled across a continent, entire economies collapsed behind him. In the year 1324, a massive caravan began moving slowly across the Sahara Desert. Tens of thousands of people walked beneath the burning sun. Camels carried mountains of gold. Soldiers marched. Servants followed. Slaves carried treasures. And at the center of it all rode a king whose wealth was so vast that historians still struggle to measure it today. His name was Mansa Musa. And according to many economists and historians, he may have been the richest human being to ever live. But the story becomes even stranger. Because when Musa traveled to Cairo during his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, he did something no ruler had ever done before. He gave away so much gold that the price of gold across Egypt collapsed for more than a decade. Markets destabilized. Inflation spread through the region. And an entire empire suddenly realized that somewhere far beyond the Sahara, there existed a kingdom overflowing with unimaginable wealth. For medieval Europe, the idea sounded almost mythical. A golden empire hidden deep inside West Africa. Cities filled with scholars. Markets stacked with ivory, salt, and precious metals. Libraries holding thousands of manuscripts. Mosques rising above desert trade routes. And at the center of it all, the legendary city of Timbuktu, a place that would soon become one of the most important intellectual centers on earth. Yet for centuries, much of the world barely understood where this wealth came from. Maps of the medieval world often showed Africa as a mysterious land filled with monsters, empty deserts, and unknown kingdoms. But one famous map from 1375 revealed something extraordinary. At the center of West Africa, a powerful king sits on a throne, holding a massive golden nugget in his hand. The caption reads simply, Mansa Musa, Lord of the Gold. That image spread across Europe like wildfire. Explorers became obsessed with finding the source of this wealth. Merchants dreamed of reaching Musa's empire. Kings and emperors wondered if somewhere south of the Sahara there existed a civilization richer than any kingdom in Europe. And in many ways, they were right. Because Musa ruled the Mali Empire, a vast civilization stretching across modern-day Mali, Senegal, Guinea, Niger, and beyond. At its height, this empire controlled nearly half of the world's gold supply. Gold that flowed through trans-Saharan trade routes like rivers of sunlight across the desert. But wealth alone does not explain the legend of Mansa Musa. Because what he built during his reign transformed an entire civilization. Universities, mosques, libraries, cities of learning. A cultural explosion that turned West Africa into one of the intellectual powerhouses of the medieval world. Yet today, many people barely know his name. How did the richest man in history rise from a distant desert empire and reshape global economics, religion, and knowledge? And perhaps more mysteriously, if Musa's wealth was truly beyond imagination, where did all that gold really come from? To understand the astonishing wealth of Mansa Musa, we must travel back to a time when the world ran on something far more powerful than oil, technology, or even land. It ran on gold. In the medieval world, gold was not just currency. It was stability, power, and global influence. Empires rose and fell based on their access to it. Kings financed wars with it. Religious monuments were covered in it. Entire trade networks stretched across continents in pursuit of it. And during the 14th century, one region on Earth controlled more of this precious metal than anywhere else: West Africa. Hidden beneath the soil of the Sahel and forest regions were some of the richest gold deposits the medieval world had ever seen. Mines in places like Bambuk, Bure, and Galam produced astonishing quantities of gold dust and nuggets. But the real genius of the Mali Empire was not just mining the gold. It was controlling the routes through which that gold flowed. Across the vast Sahara Desert stretched an enormous commercial highway known as the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. For centuries, camel caravans carried goods across thousands of kilometers of sand. Salt from the desert. Ivory from the forests. Spices, textiles, and slaves from distant regions. But the most valuable cargo moving through these routes was gold. The Mali Empire sat directly at the center of this system. Whoever controlled Mali controlled the gateway between the gold mines of West Africa and the wealthy markets of North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Mansa Musa inherited an empire already powerful, but under his rule the system expanded to a scale rarely seen in medieval history. Taxes were collected on trade. Gold production was tightly regulated. Even gold nuggets were reserved exclusively for the king, while ordinary citizens used gold dust for transactions. It was an early form of economic control that allowed Musa to accumulate staggering amounts of wealth. But wealth alone does not create legend. What transformed Mansa Musa into a figure of global fascination was a single journey. In 1324, Musa set out on the Hajj, the sacred pilgrimage to Mecca required of every Muslim who is able to make the journey. Yet Musa did not travel like an ordinary pilgrim. His caravan stretched for miles across the desert. Historical accounts describe 60,000 people, including soldiers, servants, and officials. 12,000 slaves reportedly carried bars of gold. Hundreds of camels transported bags filled with precious metal. Each camel carried nearly 300 pounds of gold dust. As the caravan moved north through cities like Cairo, Musa distributed gold generously to the poor, to scholars, to officials, and to anyone who crossed his path. It was an act of religious devotion, but it triggered an economic shock no one expected. Suddenly, Cairo was flooded with gold. The metal that once symbolized rare value became temporarily abundant. Prices skyrocketed. Inflation surged. And historians estimate that Musa's generosity destabilized Egypt's economy for over 10 years. But something even more significant happened during that journey. Musa returned home not just with spiritual fulfillment, but with architects, scholars, engineers, and books from across the Islamic world. What he built next would transform Mali into one of the most sophisticated intellectual civilizations of the medieval era. And in doing so, he unintentionally created a mystery historians are still trying to fully understand today. Because the Mali Empire was not simply rich. It was far more advanced than most people today realize. When Mansa Musa returned from Mecca, he did not return as the same ruler who had left Mali months earlier. The pilgrimage had transformed him. He had seen the great intellectual centers of the Islamic world, Cairo, Medina, Mecca, and he understood something profound. Wealth alone does not create greatness. Knowledge does. And so Musa began one of the most extraordinary cultural transformations in medieval history. Across the cities of the Mali Empire, construction began at a scale few African kingdoms had ever attempted. Architects from Andalusia and North Africa were invited south across the Sahara. Among them was the famous scholar and architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who helped design monumental buildings using a unique Sudano-Sahelian style, massive mud brick structures rising like sculptures from the desert. Mosques appeared across the empire. Libraries expanded. Schools opened. But nowhere did this transformation become more powerful than in the city of Timbuktu. To medieval scholars, Timbuktu became something almost mythical. At its height, the city hosted thousands of students and scholars studying mathematics, astronomy, law, philosophy, medicine, and theology. The Sankore University complex attracted intellectuals from across Africa and the Islamic world. Some estimates suggest that the city housed hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, texts discussing science, trade, medicine, poetry, and legal systems. At a time when much of Europe was still emerging from the early medieval period, Timbuktu had already become one of the greatest knowledge centers on the planet. Yet the deeper implication of Mansa Musa's story is not simply about wealth or architecture. It is about how history remembers power, and how easily entire civilizations can disappear from global memory. Because despite its enormous influence, the Mali Empire slowly declined in the centuries that followed Musa's reign. Trade routes shifted. Rival empires rose. European exploration began to reshape global economics. And gradually, the once legendary cities of West Africa faded from the world's attention. Timbuktu became more myth than memory. By the time European explorers reached it centuries later, many believed the stories of its wealth and knowledge had been exaggerated legends. But they were wrong. Even today, Historians continue to uncover hidden libraries buried in family homes across Mali. Thousands of ancient manuscripts have survived, fragile pages filled with the handwriting of scholars who lived during and after Musa's golden age. These texts reveal something astonishing. West Africa was not an isolated or primitive region, as older colonial narratives once suggested. It was a deeply connected intellectual world, exchanging ideas with North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. And that realization forces us to confront a powerful truth. History is not just written by those who lived it. It is written by those who preserved it. Entire civilizations can shape the world, and still be forgotten. Mansa Musa once controlled more wealth than any human being in recorded history. His empire reshaped trade networks, built cities of knowledge, and connected continents through culture and commerce. Yet for centuries, his story almost vanished from global awareness. Civilizations rise. Civilizations fall. But sometimes the greatest mysteries of history are not the things we never knew. They are the things the world somehow forgot.